and welcome to GovTech Viewpoints. My name is Teri Takai, and I'm excited to be here with you today. Now, today I'm especially excited because I'm joined by HP's Dan Gohl. He is the Chief Technology and Strategy Officer for US SLED. And we are going to have another fun and interesting conversation. Now, as each episode of GovTech Viewpoints, we explore one big question that's facing state and local government decision makers as they adopt the next generation technologies. So Dan and I are going to be breaking down the latest news and the greatest trends. We're going to talk about how they impact state, city, and county leaders. Now, for this episode, we want to talk about how government's going to lead in the age of AI. And this isn't just about government operations. What we're seeing is that AI is really opening the door for economic growth at both the state and the local level. So we're going to talk about how government officials should really be positioning their communities to benefit from the AI economy. We're going to talk about how we can actually attract tech-driven investment, build that digital infrastructure for the technology, and I think almost most importantly, strengthen the workforce readiness so that we can ensure that we're using AI as an economic development opportunity. Well, Dan, I'm so excited to have you join us. It's just a fantastic opportunity to chat with you with your broad experience, not only in government, but also in education. So, let me hear first from you about what are you seeing out there? How do you really see government and education really being able to take AI and make it an economic development initiative?
Teri, thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be with you. And just the work that the Center for Digital Government does is so critically important in fostering the conversations that drive the actions that government leaders take. You've asked me to kind of talk about what I see as I travel around the country and talk to municipal leaders, state leaders, K-12 and higher ed. And what I'll tell you is this, is that people are realizing that there's a new form of economic activity occurring. This generative AI has opened people's eyes to what's actually been going on for 10, 15 years already in terms of how the private sector and the public sector have been increasingly relying on machine learning and other forms of adaptive technology. But this is not just an infrastructure question. This is a cultural issue. This is an economic development issue. And as with any large societal change, you've got to understand what your raw materials are. And for the age of AI, raw material is about the ability to ask questions that are going to make a difference if answered. And that means having people who can ask the right kinds of questions and understand how machine enablement, whether it's through connecting artificial intelligence with the Internet of Things or making sure that our citizens know how to interact with an AI on a government website within their own private lives in order to manage their income, to help their children learn and grow. There are so many ways where we've got to change the forms of economic activity, which are dependent on how people understand what their role in civic engagement is. And so AI is changing how civic engagement occurs in the public and private sector. And government has not just an opportunity, but a responsibility to lead on that front.
Right. Dan, I love those comments. And, the one thing you mentioned there that I want to emphasize is that this is no longer just a government effort or just an education effort, but it's really around private sector coming together with both of those entities to really help everyone kind of grow in this technology knowledge.
100%. So I'll pick an example from education and then map it onto medicine. And then we're going to talk about personal economics at both the individual and the business level. So one of the things that educators have always wanted to do is to have a comprehensive record of what experiences a learner have had from kindergarten through high school and then into higher education or technical education. And that kind of, record has always been in paper and then in digital, but never been able to be mined, to ask questions of what it is I've done to understand what I need to do next.
Interesting.
That is now possible because an artificial intelligence is able to read all the records from attendance and discipline and achievement and come up with a sense of where you're at. Similarly, with medical care and history, as people change insurance companies and change doctors, they lose their records that go on. But now with individual AIs, personalized systems who keep all your records, they're not storage repositories, they're actually sources of recommendation engines. And this is going on as people look to their managing of their credit and their financial balances, as people look at their businesses in terms of how's the regulatory environment changing. Everyone needs an expert who knows not only what the rules are today, but what they were in the past. Building an infrastructure that enables access to all of that is needed. But what is going to make the difference is making sure that people are aware of it, that they're challenged to use it, that they're enabled to be able to interface with these new things, just like people had to transition from using checks to credit cards to then digital payments. Just as people went from paper to online airport security, the form of it changes, but now you can actually have an AI go and book your entire vacation for you as your own personal concierge. But there's no reason that concierge can't be part of your educational system, your family planning, your economic planning. But people have to trust it. And we certainly know that setting regulatory governance models is something that states and municipalities are doing all the time. We're 10 years on with government having AI policies. But what we have not invested in sufficiently is twofold: making sure all members of our community know how to use these tools, and secondly, upskilling our workforce so that they're able to accelerate the adoption of what it is government has already invested in.
But Dan, you bring up a really good point with that, is that I think it is, I love the conversation around all of us as individuals needing to realize the breadth and depth. But like with any technology, this one's a little scary, don't you think, in the sense that, gee, that would be my personal school records or my personal health records. So what are some of the areas that we need a little more thinking about the ethics and, making sure that if we have personal data, that personal data stays personal?
There are some really profound questions that go on, and a few of them are new, but most of them are persistent from previous ages of technology adoption. So let's take the issue about the surveillance society. Different municipalities have taken different perspectives about whether or not to deploy AI for facial recognition. In many communities, it is viewed as absolutely critical to keeping society safe. And in others, it is a nasty invasion of privacy. That is a public policy question that needs to be debated by public officials, by an informed populace that has elected them. We need to help people have an understanding of what the capabilities are and are not in the tension between surveillance and privacy. We also need people to realize that the kinds of records that AI is using, it is not generating new records on us. It is accessing records that are already there. And people now need a better sense of the transparency of what records are out there, and then what AI capabilities, which are new, can do with those records? Do we have a right to know who has what information on us? And we certainly see one perspective dominating the United States by executive order and by what are called Dear Colleague letters. And Europe has a different perspective. Asia has another perspective. And because so many of these technologies are international, it's really important that we build a local policy that we know within our town, within our city, county, state, and federal government is a common understanding of what defines a domestic view of what artificial intelligence literacy is, what artificial intelligence regulations are, and what it is we can do to maximize the benefit for society as a whole.
Dan, I love that so much because I think there's always this feeling that somebody's doing it to us or that technology is doing something to us. And I love your perspective around how we also, while in fact, a lot of these things are happening in private sector institutions and companies. Shoot, I do my share of shopping online. That we need to be aware of what all of that means, and we have to take our own personal responsibility as well. That's just like such an important part of this conversation. But it also means that we really need to be keeping up, and so our responsibilities as part of the workforce is really to continue our own education or to have either the companies we work for or whether we work for government actually also work with us to continue to build our literacy.
100%. As an employee of any institution, agency, private sector or public sector issue, we should be asking our colleagues and those who work on our annual development and evaluation plans, what is it that I should be doing around AI? We have a responsibility as the individual employed to ask that. And that implies, and I'll make explicit, that we as employers need to have a plan for everyone. There is not a single piece of the dialogue that occurs within all economic activity between transactional to strategic changes that AI is not touching right now. And so when it comes to how somebody who greets you at the desk or is cleaning your room or your office to those who are the president or sitting on the board, it's touching all of us. It's a unifying cultural shift that's occurring. And we've got to make sure that we as individuals are accepting the empowerment we have. Because when we bury our heads in the sand, it will happen outside of us and to us. We believe that individuals come together to form a society, to form an economy. We've got to be active participants in that.
I love that, Dan. And it's really about kind of overcoming a little bit of a fear factor. I think we're all a little bit scared of change, and technology change, even though I'm in the business, is something that we have to overcome. But I think when we take that sort of proactive ownership role, some of that fear factor goes away and you really get into the excitement of it.
Yeah, look, we all accept, and to your point, people for a long time were afraid of cookies on web browsers because they were tracking us. But in the end, with good guidance and, responding to the mistakes that are made out there, people are now loving the enjoyment of personalized recommendations across everything from shopping to entertainment to educational recommendations. That's only enabled by the sharing of metadata around things. But we have lots of folks that don't want to participate in that. And that's why on our browsers, we can turn cookies off. Yeah. And we need to set the rules around artificial intelligence in terms of, do I want to participate it at a generic level, or do I want to opt in for full customization? Yeah. And what are the cascading range of privacy, security, and other questions that come at that? But that means literacy. And AI literacy needs to be something that's gone on. The federal government, both the current and previous administrations, made this a top priority. There's new executive orders that are out there that are setting expectations for K-12 and higher ed to make sure that a high school diploma means being able to operate in a technologically enabled world. That's making sure we're doing right by the next generation. This year's kindergarten class is the graduating high school class of 2038.
Wow.
Think about what's happened for ChatGPT in the last 2 years and what's going to happen over the next 13. These kids who will be sitting on podcasts in the 2050s and 60s in our roles, Teri, need to look back and say, we did right by them. Public officials need to be making sure that across the board, a question they're asking is not just can we enable the AI, but how are we making sure that people know how to use it well and derive the benefits that are intended?
Dan, that is such an exciting conversation, and I love the way that you really express that for each of us. Well, we're going to have to wrap up today. So thank you to everyone for listening to GovTech Viewpoints. Be sure to subscribe to the series on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Spotify so you won't miss an episode. Now, next time, we're going to explore the next big question. How is AI reshaping how government looks at their compute requirements? What is it going to take to power all of the technology that Dan and I just talked about? Well, Dan, thanks again so much for being with me. And thanks to our audience. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Teri. Thank you, listeners. And great job, Teri. Really appreciate how you're making sure all of us are engaged in owning our future enabled by technology.